I know that I could try to control the outcome more, but because of our priorities, I'm not deciding to do that right now. And so then I choose to surrender and trust God that his timing is perfect and that he has a plan for his timing that keeps in his plan is us having a good marriage.
Yeah.
And in his plan is us parenting well. And he wouldn't give us promises or lead us down a path that led to the destruction of those things.
Hey guys, welcome back to Conversations with Tim and Jess. We are Tim and Jessica Linnet, and today we are finishing up a conversation that we've been having about prioritizing connection. It's kind of a different conversation on how you prioritize connection while managing so many other responsibilities in business and in careers. And so today I'm asking Tim a question that he was recently asked by one of our good friends, which was, how do you do it? How do you do it? And our friend was meaning it in the context of, Tim does such a good job at this. I think that you do such a good job at prioritizing connection despite all these other major responsibilities that you have, and being a good husband, being a good father, and prioritizing these things that really matter to you while still being really good at what you do at your job, in your career, and as a business owner, as an employer. And it's a lot. And so our friend who very much knows you and knows everything that you carry, which just for a little background is, Tim is a director. Or do you want to go ahead and tell people what you do, or you want me to talk about you?
Oh, I guess I can.
Just your responsibility. You're a director at a hospital, and we own businesses, and there's a lot of responsibility that you carry.
Yeah, we've been in the entrepreneur world for a long time. Like 15 years almost, I would say.
Yeah.
On and off full time in business, and I've been a director at a hospital in the pharmacy for a handful of years now as well. And so we kind of have this weird, it's like a juggling act.
Yeah.
There's so much that, that's on our responsibilities list. And we want to do them well, but at the same time, you can't do everything well too. So,
Yeah.
but that's I think in context of this whole priority thing with our kids and our marriage, it's probably important to explain first that we view our marriage as our primary ministry. And then next, I would say it would be our kids. The impact that we can make on the world is probably the greatest through our parenting. And then after that, there still is an impact that we can make by discipling and loving others that God brings into our lives. Mentoring is another good way to think about that. And so those priorities really do come before the business. But at the same time, God's given me and us a lot of promises with our entrepreneurial journey and our businesses. And so those are true too. And so one of the things that my friend was asking me was how do you do all those things? How do you do
how do you do in the context of just being you're
Yeah.
super dad and you're super husband, and yes, we all have our faults, but you are a really good dad and you are a really good husband despite being really good at all the other
Well,
things.
and I would point out that it wasn't
how do you
always,
do it?
I would point out that it wasn't always that way. Because this is 15 years. You're I was gonna.
I would not go to. I will attest to that.
Yeah,
You always had a heart to be a good dad and a
yeah,
heart to
we've
be a
grown.
good husband, though.
Yeah, so I always had the intent, for me, it was this grand experiment because I know that I have this thing on my life, this gift of being in business and building and being a leader. And I've been doing that with God the whole time, but there has been a heck of a lot of development for me and growth in my character and patience and being able to prioritize to get to the point where we are now, where we can say that I do have a really good relationship with our kids and with you. And I would say, I think there's a lot there, and we'll probably have to touch on this in different ways multiple times over this, podcast. But a good way to simplify it is just priorities. I simply prioritize my marriage more than my business. And another way to look at that is that I'm willing to have a less successful business and to find wealth slower because I need to prioritize my marriage over it.
Yeah.
And being able to like compare the two things and actually just say, yeah, I'm willing to give up success, financial success or whatever, or prestige or whatever it is, all those things that we kind of get tricked into really pursuing with the entrepreneurial world, like I would say the main narrative. I'm just willing to be less successful in business because I have to be willing to accept that internally to be a good dad and be a good husband. So part of that too is trust. Like I have to be willing in those small moments to trust that God is going to provide for us, that he is going to be the one that is the driver for the success that we have. Like, yes, I need to work. And yes, if I worked more or longer hours and skipped out on family time and didn't show up to sports games and wasn't as present with you and the kids, then sure, we would make more money and we'd be more successful. But that's not the point.
But
That's
at
not our
what
goal.
cost?
At what cost, right?
At
Like,
what cost? What's the trade-off?
yeah, like I don't want to get to the end of this
Really healthy
road
business and
and
failing marriage.
yeah, and then, be divorced at the end.
Yeah.
Like that's just not
or
an
just
option.
really not connected and not happy
Right.
and all kinds of wounds or
Yeah, so I would say
or
there's
with your kids who just don't have
there's a
that
base
connection to
value
you.
system, right? It's like a base value system that says that my kids and my marriage, my relationship with God, and even some of my mentoring relationships, like those are more important than our business success.
Yeah.
And part of that, it's like, it's not despair. It's not this thing. It's like, oh, well, like then there's no hope. Well, that's not true.
And it's
But
not giving up on that and
no,
not trying to do your best still and do it well.
yeah,
That's what, like, bringing it back to our friend asking the question, like he knows like how well you carry these things. And that was probably a piece of asking that question, that you're not just like great at fatherhood and great at being a husband, but not doing other things well. But that it's not meaning you don't try to do well, but it's having those priorities. And I think a big thing for us was realizing and kind of defining, values for our family and vision for our marriage and our family and where we are headed and where we want to be and be on the same page, help to navigate those priorities that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think a good way to get through it and be able to still pursue dreams and build and have healthy ambition in context of wanting to be like a kingdom-minded person that has these priorities, right? Is patience and trusting God on his timing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So on one hand,
That's
I'm
good.
like
Trust God on his timing.
Right.
And ask him what his timing is.
Yeah. Like if he gave us promises about different businesses that we have and different dreams that we're pursuing, then that means that like really it's on him to come up with like the timing for when that's going to happen. And we can take risk and we can be obedient and we can work hard and partner with him in that, because obviously that's a part of it. But I think like in the day-to-day moments when I'm sitting down and I'm like, I really feel like I need to get this next 3 hours of work done, but it's time for me to stop and go have dinner with my family and participate in tuck-ins and help with dinner, cleaning the house, right? Be present, whatever it is. Like in that moment, I have to choose to trust God with tomorrow and with what comes next.
Yeah.
And part of that too is like being able to admit to myself, this is the stage of life that I'm in, and embrace that. Because I think I spent a lot of time in the past, like my mind and my heart was too much in the future and what may happen. And like I would push towards that and sacrifice my responsibilities and those ministries of today because I wanted to make this future thing happen.
Yeah.
And I kind of talk about that a little bit more in my book and kind of flesh it out. But I feel like where we've progressed now is that we really do deeply trust God, that he is in charge of the timing of success for our businesses, or even if they will be or not. And that we have those priorities laid out of what is more important, and not being naive that like we can do it all and have everything be the best. Like you actually have to decide what's more important and which thing are you willing to sacrifice for to put on the top of the pile. and which thing gets like kind
Yeah.
of on the bottom of the
At
pile.
times they act like many times actually they are actually competing.
Yeah.
And I imagine that creates a lot of tension. I know. Not just imagine.
Yeah.
I'm your wife.
Yeah.
I'm in it with you.
Yeah.
And even the tension of like what you said when you were like, I had to think about it. And at night when we were talking before going to bed, and you said that you had to be okay with knowing that you could
Be more
be
successful.
more successful.
Yeah.
You could get there faster.
Yeah.
You could have done more,
Yeah.
and you know that you could be really good at it.
Yeah.
And yet choosing, okay, but my priority is a healthy marriage and a date night tonight, or
And
actually helping tuck in my kids, or whatever it is, being there on Saturday for our kids' soccer games and things like that, that have to produce this tension though between like what could be and knowing like you could get there faster, you could be more successful, like, and especially for somebody with such ambition just innately in you, to that creates tension between, I know I could actually do so much better or get there faster.
that's probably it. Get
so
there faster.
Yeah, it's more like get there faster.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that tension?
So
And what does that look like?
I think like so you make the choice, right? You're like, I am going to choose family and marriage today, which means I'm not choosing the extra business time. And I think it's really important what you do with your heart in that space.
I
like
agree.
it could lead to bitterness,
Yeah.
right?
Which
Because
won't actually be fruitful for your marriage.
no, because then
It'll
what?
actually do similar. You may as well just have kept growing your business.
Yeah. Like bitterness is a good indicator that you need to do some hard work.
yeah. You need to do some hard work
Right.
in that tension.
So for me, like I mentioned, is I take that tension that you're talking about of like where we are and what I've seen in God's promises and what could be, and we're not there yet. So that pull, and when I make decisions to prioritize family, I take that tension, and instead of letting it turn into bitterness, because I did sometimes, like these are all things that I feel like I've done and then kind of grown through and figured out. I put it in trust, and I say, okay, God, I trust you with this. And so it's more of a positioning of like surrender rather than being in control. And that's a part of it too in business.
That's good. It's leaning into surrender rather than control.
Yeah, because I know that I could try to control the outcome more, but because of our priorities, I'm not deciding to do that right now. And so then I choose to surrender and trust God that his timing is perfect and that he has a plan for his timing that keeps in his plan is us having a good marriage.
Yeah.
And in his plan is us parenting well. And he wouldn't give us promises or lead us down a path that led to the destruction of those things.
Right.
And
for
so,
the sake of that promise.
Right. So if he's put this in me and I'm like pursuing business with God, it must include the current space and timeline that we have in our lives. Right? Like it
current season.
Like God wouldn't call me to destroy our family.
Yeah.
But he does call me into business, and he did build me in a way that's obviously one of the ways that I have to put my impact on the world with him. And he's created me uniquely for this time so I can go and do these things.
Right.
But it's just got to be in context of his timing. So again, patience, right?
Context of his timing and the season of life that you're in.
So there's like long suffering, there's patience, right? These fruits of the spirit, these things that we have to like pull on, right?
To grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it took a lot to get there.
Yeah.
But over the years, we've continued to desire to do this God's way, to like do this business thing God's way. You and I both have. Yeah. And like he's had so much grace on us along the journey. Like I always had the intent of being a good husband, a good father, and then to also pursue business, but like from like a kingdom perspective, kingdom of heaven perspective.
And that was always there from the very beginning.
Yeah, the desire and the intent was there.
From the very seed of business in your life.
Yeah, but it didn't happen like that.
To do it a kingdom way, but God used all of those years to grow you, and not just grow your business really fast. It was
it's like all of these trials and all the difficulties and challenges create this huge opportunity for character growth, and being able to refine those fruits of the spirit, and even like other micro priorities too. Like for me to prioritize entrepreneurship, the job, our family, the ministry that we do with our church, all that stuff, I've simply had to cut out a lot of young Tim things, right? Like the things that like video games, like video games, right? Like things that like I would do that I would spend time on. And eventually I was like, well, I can either spend this extra couple hours per week that I have to work on starting a business with my friend over the next year, and spend these couple hours at night doing that. Or I could play video games. You know what I mean? Cause it's not an option.
Business, or I can play on video games.
Yeah. Like it's not an option to, again, sabotage my family, my marriage, or being a good father, those kinds of things. But I definitely have like maximized and designed my life in a way that all of the unimportant things kind of get cut out. Like I don't spend hours reading or watching news anymore. I do have ways to kind of get updated. People will tell me, right? Things like that.
I'll hear about it.
Maybe during election year, I'll be a little bit more active with that. I play a lot less video games. I don't Netflix binge really anymore. Like all of those things that aren't on these top priorities, like really have been just cut out in different ways. And like I'll still try to find ways to unplug and relax and have fun. But a lot of times I've strategized like, okay, well, I have these young boys that love video games and love that I love video games. And so we try to play games together, right? And then it becomes quality time. Right.
Knowing what season of life you're in too. So you had already worked that out in your heart. And now it's kind of like getting to come back around, because now you're in a new season of life where we have 3 young boys who are getting older and can do those things with you. So it's not fully just, I want to say it's not fully having to completely die to self. And yet there's a whole lot of healthy die to self in there. But I think it really does come back to knowing your priorities and knowing that a priority of ours was that we stay connected. And that's how our marriage is going to thrive. That we stay connected, and that we stay connected and attached to our kids' hearts. And that's how we're going to parent well. And so being able to figure out how do we prioritize connection while carrying all of these responsibilities that you carry and all the ambition in you to like want to grow things and build things and do it all. And just, it helps that we knew, connection is such a priority for our family. But it's more than just a value. It's also kind of a temperature gauge. It's an indicator. So knowing how connected we are kind of can let you know how much more you can take on. Like right now we're in a season where you are doing a lot more, but that's something that we decided together, and there was unity in that decision. And then we still like noticed, okay, we're not very connected. Like maybe that we need to back off or figure out how to have other things covered. Have less business calls or whatever, which really isn't even needed right now, but figuring out our priorities to keep us connected and being able to manage that tension of knowing you could have gotten places faster. And yet now here we are in a season where we're getting to keep going after dreams. And we've both signed up for what that looks like for right now. But the connection is a temperature gauge on like, okay, do we need to, maybe it's something else that we've got to cut out. We've got to like cut something out of our week, or make sure we don't make plans during the next week and stuff, so that we can stay connected, so we can stay connected to our kids.
So I think,
while knowing that you're carrying a lot more right now in this current season.
I think a big way that we do this too is like we design our lives to support a long-term bet, I guess is how I would say it. Like the way that I think about entrepreneurship is a lot different than 15 years ago. Like I used to think that we would have to push really, really hard to become really successful really fast. And then after we're done with that really hard pushing season where everything's sacrificed, then we would have made it by then, and then we can have the life we dreamed of.
Yeah.
And
Like, I'm doing this for our family,
yeah,
for the sake. And I think that I hear that a lot.
which like first,
in that realm of entrepreneurship
right,
and business, like, I'm doing it for our family. But what if it takes 10 years of sacrificing that?
right. So like for a single guy that is just pursuing, great, like whatever, and that's fine. But for us, it just didn't work. And when we shifted, it was a banker friend of ours. He's like the CEO of a local bank, and we were doing Love After Marriage
Yeah.
in that
Great
season
course.
together with them. And he had this word about God calling us to incremental
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah.
It's this idea of like small steps over time that build wealth.
Time,
And
yeah.
there's even like in Proverbs, there's a verse that like backs that up.
Mhm.
And our mindset kind of shifted heavily for me in that season, because I shed all of this like striving to try to manually make everything work, and instead embrace the fact like, okay, I have only so much time and capacity, and we have so much resources. Let's take wise incremental steps that allow us to build towards growth over time, instead of these big, huge bets. And part of it comes to financial, the other side comes to like life design. But I wouldn't sign up for $1 million loan today if I knew that I couldn't handle the payments, unless we were successful with what the money was supposed to do. Like putting yourself in these crisis scenarios where it's like you have to either make it or you're dead, right? Or you can't make payroll. That's not the style of business leadership that I think is conducive towards families and marriages. And again, everybody's situation is different, but we started making decisions that were like we wouldn't take on, because I think debt is actually acceptable in business, as long as you can handle the payments, as long as it leads to more cash flow, incremental cash flow, right?
Right.
So
as long as it's not like a stressor.
right.
So, which means you have to really know that you can handle those payments.
Yeah. What does this mean for us emotionally?
Yes.
Is it,
will it influence how you make decisions?
Right.
Because do you feel more in crisis mode?
Right.
And sometimes you don't make as good of decisions because of that. But like,
so we'll never build payroll above what we can actually afford, which is actually biblical too. Right. So the way that we run our businesses is very different now than it was
with the
incremental growth. Because before it was like, we started our first company 14 years ago, and like we had payroll that I had to fundraise for, and we fundraised a lot of money for a long time, and I was really good at it, but it still created this crisis baseline where either you have to get the money from investors for this startup, or you're going to have to shut down your company and you can't afford to pay these team members. And that was something that like we chose into. It was a style of business that works really well for some people, right? Like the venture capital, angel investor style of business where you have this big bet and you're going to try to bring in all this money to make it happen. But it just wreaks havoc on families. And again, like everybody's situation is different, but we don't do it that way.
Of like how many.
Yeah. I mean, you can look it up, and Small Business Association will give similar numbers, but yeah, it's like 1 in 10 of businesses, ish are like big hits. Maybe 2 or 3 out of those, including that one, are going to be somewhat successful, like after the first year.
Venture capitalists.
This is just businesses in general after the first year. And then the VCs, it's like similar too. But then there's like 7 or at least half that are just going to fail, right?
Right.
So it's not like a lack of hope, right? Or that your idea is bad, but those are just the statistics. And so if you're setting yourself up from a cash flow perspective to potentially have to face being one of those businesses that doesn't catch it in time, or you can't fundraise enough fast enough, and you're putting your family through all this turmoil and crisis, like you're not setting yourself up for having a healthy home life.
Right.
And so we've shifted our like strategy with business management, and the bets that we make are different now, because we aren't willing to sacrifice our family, our connection, for these big maybes in business. So there's a lot more there. There's a lot of subtle stuff, and there's like 15 years of us like stumbling and
There's
kind
a
of
whole lot more we could
walking
talk
through
about
it.
our
But yeah,
own journey.
but we could
That's
summarize it down to like priorities, right?
Yeah.
Like, are
Well,
you,
and coming back to the initial question of like,
Mhm.
how do you do it?
Yeah.
And so coming back to that initial question, how do you do it? This is how we've done it
Yeah.
is, knowing that those were your priorities, our marriage, our
In
family,
every decision we make,
ministry,
right?
our priorities,
Yeah.
and then having to figure out how to get all of the other things in, which which in ways looked like weeding out video games, weeding out
Well,
hobbies, and letting working on the business be a hobby.
so I want to
But-
give a specific example too, because like recently we bought a marketing company, and we ended up getting a larger capital infusion, like a little bit of a bigger loan than we needed to, which hurts the profitability of the acquisition. But at the same time, it gave us space and capacity that if the company didn't perform the way it did over the last couple of years after we bought it, then we would have had that cash flow
Yeah.
to help sustain the hard time.
Very good.
And like little
are
did we
employees.
know that we were going to need it. And it was a really
Which is why we
challenging,
made that decision.
Right.
It's like in the off chance that it was making those decisions that just protect the stress in our home.
right. So it was a
That
challenging,
it will just be safer to know that we have that.
yeah,
and
it
not
was,
put us suddenly into crisis stress to keep that going.
right. So it still ended up being a challenging couple months.
Yeah.
Um,
But it would have been way worse.
It would have been way
if we didn't
worse
have
if
that
we didn't
savings.
have the extra capital to be able to sustain the downward swing in revenue, right? Because we had, anyways, there's just some stuff that happened with some employees, and maybe it's a story for another day.
Another story.
And now I think it seems like we're on the other side of that. But we said multiple times over the last like 3 months or so, we're like, oh my gosh, we're so glad we got that extra loan money.
I think we've said it multiple times just in the last week
I know.
or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Both of us.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad
So
that
it
got-
wasn't,
so it was just-
maybe it wasn't the best decision from a cash flow standpoint, or a profitability standpoint, I would
Right.
say. Like we knew that the company could afford to make those payments easily, but we're paying a little bit of more interest on a little bit more capital. But when we were making that decision, it wasn't a business decision. It was a family decision. We're like,
lifestyle.
yeah, we're like,
decision.
we want to be able to weather the storm of challenges and difficulty with this new acquisition and not have it impact our personal lives. We don't want to have to like dig into our different budgets and savings that we have in our personal life or block us from being able to make future acquisitions because we had to take from that, those savings and put them into this business.
Or be pulled into that incredible stress.
Right.
Which
We were
still stressful. It was still a lot to carry with everything that went
Right.
down, but it was a decision to help cushion any transitional blow.
Yeah.
And I would say that it was also an employer decision of knowing we wanted capital there in case the transition costs more, and knowing we have another value of making sure we can pay our employees, we can pay people. And job security is something else that we care about, giving job security to people who work for us. So I think that was another piece of it. But
Yeah.
which is us just wanting to protect their homes too and their families and not pull them into turmoil.
Yeah. So I think like to kind of add on and summarize from that initial question is that having our priorities in place, be willing to be less successful, be willing to make less money, and prioritize your family over it. Like we spent more money on that acquisition than maybe we had to, but we did it because we wanted to prioritize family. So actually it's like really including my relationship with you and the kids into all of my business decisions, like all of them.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good way to
How
say
is
it.
this
How
going
is
to
this gonna
impact my relationship
Yeah.
with my wife? And how can I make a better decision that allows me to spend Saturday with my family
Yeah.
and that allows me to spend night times with you and to be able to unwind and have that connection time? So how do I prevent myself from getting forced into situations where I have to manage business crisis? And actually, my last little point is like a lot of times 15 years ago and 10 years ago when we were in startup world fundraising for our first business, it was crisis that was pulling me away from my family.
Yeah.
And it was me wanting to provide for my employees.
The
And
day after Titus was born, it was crisis that
Yeah.
pulled you away from being
And so
a
like
newborn.
you can't block all crisis from happening, but you can anticipate the types of crisis that might happen sometimes. And you can only walk down the roads that you know that you could handle without damaging your family. And if walking down a certain business risk, because we still take a lot of risk,
We do still take a lot of
but
risk.
it's acceptable risk, right? And like if I'm weighing my options and I'm deciding, do I want to take this new risk or not? If I would have to put my family and my time with my family and the connection with them on the scales, that maybe I might actually damage my marriage if things go bad in this risk, then that won't be an option for me. And it took me a long time to realize that well-intentioned people managing crisis that they kind of walked into, that's actually something that you can try to plan and prepare for and maybe avoid. And like you kind of really need, it's just including those relationships and those priorities into those decisions.
Into the decision.
How will this affect my family if it doesn't go well? Because maybe it won't.
Right. Because there's a lot of other things that you could add to that. Things that we did with our own personal budgets and decisions we've made to help us get to the point where then we can more safely take risks, if that thinks safer risks. And really taking it back to what you said, banking on like long-term gains and seeing the long vision for things with the incremental growth. So
we could go on and on, but I think that's good.
A long podcast. And definitely a lot, which we will touch on a lot more of this stuff. But this is a good stopping point. So do you have something else to say?
Yeah, I would just say like and subscribe so you can keep following us more. And
like, hey, pray for them.
Well, I think the good takeaway from this one is for you that are listening to really sit down and think about your priorities. And like, I would just add one little thing in there to say that in some ways, when I was well-intentioned, I like tricked myself into thinking that I really was prioritizing my family.
Oh, yeah.
And
because I think you fully believed that this was how you were prioritizing your family. And yet our marriage was hurting and our family was hurting, and you were still a good dad. You were still a good-hearted husband, but our value of connection was screaming.
Yeah. So
And
I would say that you may think you're doing well, just like I did. Or you might think that your intentions are enough. And I actually don't think they are. I feel like being well-intentioned is good, and walking down a path and trying to partner with God is like wonderful. But I would encourage you to spend some time praying and talking to God about like, where are your priorities and maybe what lies you might be like believing about yourself and your business success and how you have to succeed fast enough, and like kind of include God into that conversation. So that way you can really kind of do some heart work and be honest with yourself and more like kind of surrender to what he has to say. Try to listen to what God has to say about your family and how you actually are prioritizing your relationship with your kids and your wife, and just let him speak to you. Because he is trustworthy. He loves you. He's not going to do it out of shame. Like he challenges us in a way that we can love that challenge and that growth because he's safe, because he's a good father. And it's not out of, he doesn't want to punish you. He wants to give you gifts like of growth and deep connection with your spouse and deep connection with your kids. And there's a way for you to still follow and pursue your business dreams and the things that like you just have deep down inside your heart that you want to go and make an impact on the world. You can still pursue those in his timing with patience and still have a strong relationship with your wife and your kids. Like it's totally possible, but it requires you to like get vulnerable with the Lord and surrender to him and let him speak to you. Like, let him just show you. Spend some time with him on that.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. And God knows so much more than we do and has so much more wisdom to give you. So, like Tim was saying, I would encourage you guys to take that time to just invite God into your heart to speak to you about your dreams and your business, your family values, what values God has for your family, for your marriage, and just see what happens, see what He does.